Before we get into interrogating Janice and Amy and Pam, I just wanted to quickly run through a few findings from two pieces of research that Mining Journal's published recently, our World Risk Report and our Global Leadership Report, and they'll hopefully provide a few bits that we can grab onto for the conversation this afternoon. Our core finding across both pieces of work was that the industry is far from comfortable dealing with the social licence issue, which I think follows on nicely from the last panel, but is very, very comfortable dealing with technical risk. The other issues that the major threats that are concerning the industry are around social licence and reputation as well, and then a lack of discoveries. But despite the fact that social issues and lack of discoveries are the biggest threats, addressing these challenges isn't actually seen as an opportunity for the industry. And in fact, improving stakeholder relationships and making greenfield discoveries were mid-table or lower in the hierarchy of options that we gave to industry respondents. Instead, the greatest opportunities were seen as improving commodity prices, over which we have no control, and also technology advances, which obviously come from outside the mining industry and from tech companies. So among opportunities which companies had some control, efficiency gains and brownfield expansions fared best. And we've seen we've heard a lot about planning so far in the program. And just on that note, there is one final finding I wanted to bring up. A third of management teams only discuss issues beyond a 3-year horizon once a year or less, with 19% saying they never discuss the fate of their company that far ahead of time, and only 10% factored long-term issues into their weekly decision-making processes. So this looks to us very much like an industry that is aware of large fundamental concerns that we speak about at conferences like this. But at a company level, we take a very short-term view of where the risks are and how they can be managed for growth, potentially because of short-term reporting cycles around publicly listed companies. But there's a lot there, Pam, to go on. Given you partnered with us on the leadership research, I just wanted to start with you and look at that social licence and reputation issue and how we've managed it previously, and are we even getting close to getting our heads around it?
So what's kind of interesting is this has come up in almost every comment.
No. Is there a mic?
Guys, oh, there we go. My app.
Let's go on again. You have to hold it in front of you.
Okay. Is that okay? Yeah. So one of the things I think that we've all observed so far today is that the whole concept of corporate social responsibility, of community engagement, it's come up in just about every topic. I'm going to have to stand like I'm holding something, sorry. It's come up in just about every topic, irrespective of what the topic is. It seems to come back, which is kind of interesting because, you know, we're really known in the mining industry to be quite siloed, and yet the silos have broken down for a number of the panel discussions today and talked about things way beyond what the actual topic was. So to me, that's kind of an interesting learning. I've just, you know, been listening to Steve and writing down some of his words: engagement, you know, voices heard, culture. Everybody knows what this is about, and all of the wording is correct, but it seems to be where we stumble is actually putting it into action. And whether that's big steps or small steps, it's the putting into action that we seem to really have a struggle with. I was at a conference last week where one of the questions that was raised, and this is really specifically to community engagement, was at what mark do you say that you've gotten consent from a community? And I thought that was really interesting because what it told me is that in the mining industry, we're really good at measuring, and so we're using that to look through the lens of community engagement, when really, I guess the question that we should be asking is, how engaged and how good have we been at engaging the community to be able to feel that we can say, we believe we now have consent, not a number. So if it's okay to say that 51% of we've got a consent level of 51%, so let's go ahead, then it's also okay to have to then deal with 49% of people absolutely fighting you for the rest of your journey. And so is it right to look through that lens and put it almost like a negotiation instead of saying to yourself, what's the engagement level and what's acceptable for us? And what do we think is going to be the right thing to do, given if we don't get that right consent, we know we have to go back to scratch. So it made me start thinking about the old days of customer service. When I first joined consulting, everything was in the 80s or 100 years ago. Everything was about customer service. And one of the phrases that was used was, if you fail with one guy, it's a 100% failure with that one guy. And so isn't that the same when you talk about community engagement? Because that one failure is going to have a massive impact if you don't get it right. So that's kind of the lens that we're seeing people starting to look through. And certainly I think that's what Steve's point was earlier, is very much that you've got to look at how are you going to engage and not, am I going to tick the box and say, I've got consent. So that's kind of how I'd look at it.
Amy, anything to add? I think we could probably say 10 years ago we were really, really bad at this. I mean, are we better? Are we doing anything better?
It's a great question. I think yes, better, absolutely. I think that the industry in general has a lot more understanding about the impact of social change in particular. In the past couple of years, we've seen just the pace of change and the pace of acceptance of certain things has been really fast. It used to be that, we talked a lot about social media in the last panel, it used to be that you could kind of get away with some things and have them under the covers, and you could put some really good marketing and some really good communications around some issues. That's no longer the case. That ability doesn't exist anymore. Everything is very transparent. And so this point around, do I need 50% acceptance? Do I need 70% acceptance? It's really every single person that you need to be building that acceptance through. And you're not going to win them all, but it's really about the sort of the volume of that acceptance. So that's what I would say in that space.
Janice, did you want to weigh in?
I would just add that, so last week I was at the same conference as Pamela, and I spoke about risks. And in the top risks, social responsibility was number one. And we know that, and I think we've certainly made gains in the last number of years. And the industry is certainly very good at understanding and managing its technical risks. When it comes to social, it's a little bit more complicated. People are more complicated, than technology. But moving forward from, an industry that's, you've heard it many times this morning, it's a risk-adverse industry, but the number of risks are rampant, the different types of risks. Social responsibility, to me, is a culmination of many risks that come together. It's not simply just about the social engagement. Why do people don't want mines in their backyard? A lot of times it's because of environmental management, poor practices, we heard about that earlier. A lack of transparency, we're getting better, we're being more transparent, that's only going to improve. About building trust, right, that's going to improve as well. But a lot of times it's that historic, which we heard in the last panel, the historic legacy issues, the environmental legacy, the poor performance in terms of dealing with communities. We're improving, but this is certainly still the major risk right now facing the industry, and we're seeing some major repercussions from not managing it well.
Feels a bit like the pace of change, it's happening, but it's not happening fast enough. I mean, are we at a point where we're tackling a few of these core risks, we're talking about them a lot, but we're not doing enough, and something else is going to come in and change things for us? Is that a reasonable perspective, Amy?
Absolutely. The number one risk that I see to the mining industry is going to be somebody who's not a miner coming in and taking over parts of the industry. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the technology companies are going to come in and start driving trucks and hauling waste, it means that they're going to be looking for an entirely different way of getting the natural resource into the manufacturing processes. Data is king. I'm sure you have heard that over the span of today, and we'll hear that more tomorrow. The people that own the data, the companies that own the data, will be the ones that will drive the industry. That is something that the mining industry needs to be thinking about first and foremost. Not everybody. You have to defend the core, you have to have absolutely efficient mining operations, but you need to be thinking about what is the major disruptor that's going to happen.
So Amy, is the risk there that we don't have a way as an industry and as companies and as management teams to be able to really look forward enough to be able to see what changes are coming down the line? And so that becomes a risk unto itself, in that we're dealing with today's, and I think someone said it today, today's quarterly results, but nobody's actually stepping back and saying 1 foot in the present, 1 foot in the future. We've got to deal with today, but boy, do we have to make sure we deal with tomorrow. And what are the systems, processes, ways of working that can capture that forward view so that we can do something about it right now?
Absolutely. I was talking earlier today about the .com era and the coming on of the internet. So show of hands, which I'm not going to be able to see because there's lights in my eyes, but show of hands of who knows the New York Times story and how the New York Times moved to a mobile platform.
There's no hands.
There are no hands, so I will tell the story. So the New York Times, essentially, when they came out and they decided that they were going to have the New York Times, they said, great, we're going to move our paper business over to our electronic business. We're going to go online. And they ran that business the exact same way that they ran their paper business. And they held that management team. They said, okay, we need a separate management team, but they held them to the exact same metrics that they held the New York Times paper business to. So they had the same margin metrics. They had the same investment metrics. They had all of the same metrics. They wanted the same amount of subscriber base. And it failed miserably within about a year. And so they then needed to figure out a totally different way to hit that market and go tackle it. And so they created an entirely separate business run by an entirely separate CEO, and they gave them their entirely own separate set of metrics so that they could go, they could experiment, they could be differentiated, they could think differently, they could put that 1 foot into the future. And I think that's something that the industry historically, the mining industry historically, has not done to the level that they need to, and in particular in this very disruptive time, need to start thinking that way.
Janice, when you talk to mining companies, do you get a feel that there is a change of thinking happening, or do you experience a lot of lip service?
I think there's certainly a change in thinking, but it's a large earth-moving industry. You can't change things like you can in the .com era, in IT. So change is going to be slow, just by nature. I think there's a willingness. They see, I think there is recognition that certainly, we've heard it this morning, grades are declining, ore bodies are deeper, they're in more remote, they're more dangerous or politically unstable regions. So around the resource, there's changes around that, there's risks there. So they recognize there need to be changes in technology, digitization, but all of these, again, the longer term vision is still not there. We're still looking at, making sure that we're producing at the right pace, we're getting the returns we need to get without the longer term. And it was mentioned this morning, I think from Carl, about, CEOs, they're only got a 3 or 4 year term. So you're always looking for that time frame. You're not looking 10, 20, and these things take time. So the longer term vision is not there. And to make the big leaps, whether they be on a social, environmental, technology, resource, financial, that's going to take time, and you need to have a kind of more of a visionary and also more integrated approach to how you address those risks and those opportunities that go along with the risks.
Feels like quite a clear clash between investment reporting cycles and shareholder returns, etc., and bringing through those visionaries that we need. Are there any ways around that?
Just thinking about some of the way that we phrase this, we use phrases like lip service or a lack of visionaries. And I would almost, in defence of everybody in the room and everybody in the industry, I would almost think that in today's world, there's not a lot of people, and we were in a session earlier where I say this for another context, but there's not a lot of people who have been through a lot of the things that we're seeing and doing today. So I think it's way less about culpability, about, pointing fingers or casting blame, and I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but just using that as a way to express this point. And it's way more about capability and sometimes capacity. Do you have enough time? Do you have enough space? Do you have enough people wrapped around you to actually stop and look at the world, smell the roses, watch the snowflakes, and try to deal with a lot of this stuff that's coming at us? Because there is, again, not a lot of people who've been through a lot of what you're dealing with in today's world. So perhaps it's a conversation around how do we build the capability and the capacity so that in 10 years' time, the risks aren't the same ones because we're learning how to deal with them.
How do you do that? How do you do that in an environment where you have to look at the next quarter, where you are pressured in the short term? How do you create that space to manage risk?
I'm CEO of a publicly traded company myself, and one that has had, in the 12, 18 months that I've been in the job, had to do a huge amount of reinvention. 72-year-old company that has reinvented itself quite literally. So I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think there is a having to sit back and recognise that you don't have all the answers, you don't have all the right people, you don't have all the right tools, systems, processes, and so you've got to go out to market and look for that. You've got to start, you've got to figure out how to surround yourself with the people who can do the one step forward or one step in the future, and not rely solely on the team that you've got today.
On that talent point, and not to jump to talent so quickly, but it's such a critical point around what Pam just said there. So the asset-intensive industries, mining is not alone in this, has a very kind of experience mentality, which is, I think, a fantastic thing about the industry and something I really love. I love depth of experience. The interesting thing that's happening right now is so many of the technologies that are out there, both from mining technology in the pit, in the processing plants, through to information technology, data analytics, and how things are working, are technologies that are pretty much run by a much younger generation. And figuring out how to harness that power in a strong and sort of risk-averse way is something I think that we all collectively need to do. I have this challenge myself. I'm not a millennial, and meaning I'm older than a millennial. I am not in high school. So I have a huge challenge of a trust perspective, of being able to say, I can trust that somebody that doesn't have 20 to 30 years of experience in something to be able to bring the right answer to me. And so I think collectively we all need to figure out, just holistically, society needs to figure out how to get very comfortable with the fact that there are technologies and capabilities that are very differentiated from the way that we all learned how to do things.
Janice, did you want to weigh in?
I was just saying, we're going back to what Pamela was saying. It's an exciting time. Things are different now. We have a lot of opportunities, digitization. We have a resource, finite resource. We heard that this morning. And the extraction of that resource, the way that we're doing it, there are certainly opportunities for improvement. Where's Nathan? Okay, the ball mill. Nathan, where are you? There he is. 100 years. You've all heard Nathan talk about the ball mill. If you ask somebody, how do I get the metal out of this mineral that's in this rock, and how do I break the rock to do so? It wouldn't be the way that we do it now. I mean, yes, that made sense 100 years ago. We have a new generation. We have a different way of thinking. there's opportunities around the way that we look at data, but we just can't be talking about data that we're going to extract data and throw it out there, and somebody's going to figure it out. We have to be strategic in the way we use that data and we think about that data. So the resources that we have, we need to be using them in a smart way. We have to extract them in a way, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the same way, and I'm going to put my plug in now. If we're looking at resource extraction and what I like to call green commodities. So resource extraction from maybe unconventional sources, not necessarily going into depth to be able to extract a resource at grades that are very, very low when we're looking at a legacy of waste, mine waste, on surface that is causing reputational damage to this industry, and grades are 3, 4, 5 or times higher than what we're mining right now. It's a no-brainer. I mean, the wastes are already pre-ground, energy savings there. So we need to not necessarily move completely away from what we're doing, but look at other opportunities around whatever situation we have now, whether it be a legacy issue or an opportunity around the way we look at data. So dovetailing those two together and pulling in the transparency and trust pieces, I think there's a good path ahead of us.
Staying on the transparency and trust and reputation issue, is there a problem? I mean, why do we not see as much collaboration? As we hear a lot about collaboration today is another theme. Why do we not see as much collaboration? I mean, not even just between industry bodies, but between companies and then even within companies. It feels like people don't talk. There isn't a lot of collaboration around improving the image. How do we improve that? How do we manage that problem? Anyone?
So I have a perspective, and look for you two to add on. So, my perspective is that the industry historically has been trying to drive efficiency through the way that we've historically looked at work. It's an engineering-led industry and a science-led industry, which tends to look at methodologies like lean. And we go in and we find an issue and we try and sort through that issue. And then we work out from that issue. And rarely do we step up and look across our entire integrated value chain. We were talking earlier about metallurgy and the concept of really process engineering and understanding kind of how something starts and goes through the entire process and the different steps that something takes. And that's just not historically how we've all looked at the work that we're doing. And so we tend to work in a mine with a mine manager and a concentrator with a concentrator manager. And so just crossing those lines in and of themselves within one single business is hard enough. And a lot of that has to do with the metrics and the way we've all been managed for years and years. And so that mentality just tends to, I think, go across everything that we do. So.
Yeah, I would add to that, we will often label things, and so we talk about aerial mapping, not looking at it from that linear perspective, but really looking at how everything is related today and the impact and the unintended consequences when you do one thing and something else happens. I used in the last session the example of China's one-child policy. That was clearly, there's a massive unintended consequence because they were looking at it from the perspective of today, but not really what's going to happen down the line. And that was baked in 1980, that now they have to come up with massive plans to figure out how they're going to work, with a country that had to live with a one-child policy. That's about not really joining up all the dots and not looking at things from an aerial view. And at the end of the day, not putting in another favourite phrase of mine at the moment is, but not putting your head up. And it really is, today's world is, you've got to manage in a heads-up environment. You've got to look around you. You've got to take in what's going on in the rest of the world, in the guys next door, the next company, the other consumers. It's all related. And until you get that heads-up kind of mentality at every level and every position, it's going to be tough to break out of the silos.
So, and one thing to add on this point is that, again, I'll give the room and myself a little bit of credit here. It hasn't been really easy to do that. the information has not been available in a really easy to get fashion, and information is currently tied up in equipment, it's tied up with different vendors, it's tied up in really hard to look at places, and information that quite honestly has needed, days worth of analysis. And so part of this ability to shift now is due to that ability to actually look at that in a much different way, that ability to connect that data in a much faster way, an ability to look at that data in a much more, quite honestly, palatable way at many different levels within the organization. So again, giving ourselves some credit. It's not because it's not something that we've all stuck our heads in the sand on. It's just that ability to really look at data in a different way.
Just wanted to go back on the collaboration part of it. I mean, collaborating in a competitive space is a challenge, no doubt. One of the areas that I'm working is rare earth elements, extraction of rare earth elements. There's a space where it's a great example. We use the expression in that community of opening the kimono because nobody wanted to share what their issues were. So nobody was succeeding, but nobody wanted to share what their challenges were. So you can either decide to go it alone and everybody fails, or try to build relationships and have small wins by building trust around certain issues. Whether that be under energy efficiency or environmental management, easy things to get around the table, to discuss, to build that collaborative mentality and those relationships, then move into more pressing things. But start with the safe space first to build the collaborations, because again, if you're not going to collaborate on some of the challenging areas, ultimately I think there'll be some impacts, and not positive impacts, to the entire sector.
On the collaboration front, it's interesting. I'm working with a mining university right now and trying to help them figure out what their strategy is going to be for the next 5 to 10 years. And that's on how to attract students to the mining industry, and then also how to build a curriculum within this mining university that is building the right type of talent for the industry. And one of the things, as I started talking to them, I said, well, I'd love to be able to go out and interview some other mining universities, see what they're doing, and we'll kind of come back to you with all this information. But that might be hard because of, competition. And they were like, what competition? They're like, we're education, we don't care. Go talk to everybody, share our information. We just want to better mining. And it was this eye-opening moment for me where I was like, if we're really gonna tackle this talent problem in mining, how do you collaborate in such a way to really be able to go do that and really gain from everybody working together?
I would carry that forward and say, how do you pick up on what other industries and other decades have had to deal with and get some of the bright spots from there and say, absolutely, there are people, there are associations, there are industries and companies who have dealt with similar problems but different. So what can we learn? And as you're talking about that, I was thinking about, when I was growing up in Australia, vocational skills was seen to be something that was okay. Whereas when you go to certain other countries around the world, culturally, it's about academic skills. The Aussies wanted to really focus and get a lot of people into vocational skills, apprenticeships going. And I asked, I think you were there, Janice, I asked a group last week who had heard of the World Skill Olympics for apprenticeships. Who in the room's heard of that? Very few in the mining industry, which is kind of weird because it's all about trades, and there's so much in the mining industry that requires you to have some form of, trade skill. And yet, the Aussies really went hard on getting kids into vocational skills. And then the industry said, how are we going to make this exciting? We're going to set up a World Skill Olympics. And there are 60 countries and some 60, my numbers might be wrong, but a lot of different trades and a lot of different countries that compete in this. And it has become something very cool for the guys who are going through apprenticeships. That's the kind of thing that I would think you can learn from, cross-industry, cross-whatever, learning, and apply to a lot of the things we're dealing with in the mining industry today.
We're on the skills, we may as well carry on. everyone's acknowledging that there is a skills gap, there is a problem coming up in terms of attracting the next generation of mining professional, but I'm not hearing a huge number of answers coming through. Can you share a few of your thoughts about what needs to change in the mining sector to be more attractive for that next generation of professionals for the industry?
I'm not sure that, I think that a lot of people are talking about this just about every day. I think that it was baked in the 90s and 2000s in terms of the skills shortage today. I think it's bigger than mining. I think everybody's dealing with this issue, every industry, so the competition just, quadrupled and multiplied because you've got to try and compete with the, Amy was talking about Google, the kids are all going to Google. So I'm not sure that there's a really succinct and easy answer in terms of what it is that you can do today that you haven't already heard on a lot of the panels that have spoken about a lot of the issues, because it still comes down to figuring out what that one step in the future, what are those future skills so that you can bake them last decade to be able to really address that skills shortage. But I think about the work we were doing in Zambia the last couple of years. We were working for both an NGO and a mine. The NGO had everyone lined up to have people come and work there. Same conditions, same difficult environment, the whole bit. The mine could not get people to get on a plane and come out to Zambia to work. Same place.
Well, we have to change the image of the sector. I'm in metallurgy, and you look around, I'm sure you'd be hard pressed to find metallurgical school these days because it's not something very sexy. You call it materials now because that's far more interesting, materials for the next generation. But metallurgy, oh my God, no. So I think it is about appealing to the next generation to kind of impart to them materials. They come from metals, they come from minerals, and they come from rocks. They have a role to play in how we extract those ultimately, advanced materials, and helping to find a new way to do so in a way that's ethically done and sustainably done. And so looking at the next generation and their involvement and having them being part of it, having part of that transformation of this industry to the next generation. Minerals and metals are going to be needed, as was noted earlier, for the transformation towards a green economy. No doubt we're going to need that. So we just can't say we don't need them, don't need mining. It's important that we have those resources, and we have to look at how we extract them. And that's what that next generation can do. And I think they would be up for the challenge it was presented to them.
Yeah, I think I think part of it is a marketing challenge, and I think Janice could run that campaign because that was quite good. So I think the research on the millennial generation is that they want to be part of making a change. They want to be involved in a company that is socially and economically responsible, and not just involved in like a part of that change and a part of being actually part of making that happen. So I think that's quite good. I think two other things I would think about in this space. One of them is you absolutely need to figure out other sources of talent, and if that means building that talent for the industry, then absolutely, and that could mean going to talent sources you haven't thought about in the past. Some of that could be trying to educate a different talent source and creating your own universities and your own relationships with different universities and businesses. And then also I think that the view on absolutely utilizing technology in this space to be able to have people be able to be interfacing with data in a different way. I've talked about data so many times, but just that ability to be able to use a resource that's not physically in a location like Zambia, that ability to utilize just the video quality, utilize connectivity just in a different way and be comfortable with that. We were chatting earlier just about the gaming industry. Kids today will sit around, and I don't know how many people have kind of high school age or college age children. They will sit, and instead of meeting at someone's house in the evening, they will sit in their own houses on headsets and have conversations around a video game. That, it's a big mental leap for us to get there that business can run that way, but this is how these kids are growing up today, and it's very comfortable for them. So I think we all need to figure out how to get comfortable with a different way of working.
And I guess also get comfortable with the cards you've been dealt, and figure out how to make those work for you. 5 generations of people in the workforce today, there's got to be some huge benefits that you can leverage if you figure it out for your business. Not cookie cutter approach to a particular situation or a particular group, but how do you combine these 5 generations to be a multiplier? How do you get people to not be individual contributors, but to figure out how to collaborate to really do cool and neat and new and different stuff in the mining industry? Those are the kinds of things that I think, the more we think about it, the more we talk about it, the more we put it as our challenges, and the more conversations and forums we can get around it, the better off we will be collectively to address the issue as an industry issue.
Are there any things that we've talked about things and how they might manifest in the future? Are there any risks that we haven't discussed that you guys think about on a daily basis or on a weekly basis that are going to pop their heads up and change things or change things for us that we should be thinking about now? Anyone?
Well, there's risks that we have today that we didn't discuss that are certainly intertwined and interrelated to many of the others. Permitting, okay? We assume we're going to get a permit. We might not. It's happened already. Some mines have not been permitted for various reasons. So the risk around whether or not we're even going to be able to operate a mine are present, and they're only going to get worse unless we address some of the other risks. The risks around resource replacement, or even risks around new world or modern world resources. Those are questions in terms of where are we going to get those next resources, whether they be the traditional resources or the future resources for the low carbon economy. It's things like that. Then there was we touched briefly on environment, but there are a number of environmental risks that we didn't even talk about. Water, energy, climate change, the list goes on and on. They're there, and certainly interwoven into social license, into permitting, but they're not going away either. And they plague this industry. Again, the historic legacy challenges and the impacts of this industry on the environment and on water, waste management, energy, things like that. So those are some others. Maybe they're not next generation risks, but if we don't address those risks now, there won't be a next generation.
Here's what I would say on risk. One of the things that I really enjoy about the industry is actually the amount of appetite for risk there is. I was saying earlier to these guys that, mining is its own form of legalized gambling, right? It's all about taking a very small sample, a couple small samples, and putting a bunch of money on a plate and saying, we're going to go after this space. We're going to go try and get some really high quality good ore out of a space that we don't really know that much about. And there's a bunch of people in the room who would probably argue and say, yeah, but we've done all this research and we've done all this. At the end of the day, there's a really good appetite for risk there. What I find interesting is that appetite for risk, it gets a lot less, sort of the more into the process that you get within mining. And so I think that, from a risk perspective, I think just collectively the industry needs to think about how they're going to be willing to be okay with kind of learning as you go in some spaces, taking on a little bit more risk in areas that aren't safety related, taking on a little bit more risk in areas where there wouldn't be a mine stoppage or processing stoppage, and really understanding where it makes sense to make more kind of educational risk steps and really opening that basis there.
And so isn't a lot of that around problem solving and decision making is really critical to risk, right? And the ability to do something about it.
Yep.
And so, as a final thought, I would think about, we talk about social license, we talk about the way that we operate a business, we talk about financial side of the business. How about talking about a leadership license? Because isn't that one of the major things that we have to get our heads around? How are we going to lead businesses in a future world that we're not quite sure what it really looks like yet, but we're going to have to solve it because that's the world that we're going to operate in. There's still enough people around the room who are going to be alive and kicking and in this industry in the next 10, 20 years. I will not, but I know a lot of you will, and I'd be thinking in terms of what's my leadership license to operate, because that's a huge deal going forward.
Do we have time for questions? Yeah? Any questions? Lots of questions. There's a microphone coming, I think.
Awesome, thank you. Amy, you said earlier that likely the industry will get disrupted from outside. Nathan mentioned it earlier on another panel. Janice, you talked about there won't be a next generation. Isn't the single largest risk facing the industry if we do not transform the business of mining, we will not have a mining business? Is that not the real risk that the industry is facing? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. That's a quote from two CEOs of mining companies.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. And I think we're sort of arguing in an educational way earlier on this. I think there's two impacts. I think one is that just technology companies will come in and run your business in an entirely different way. So that's one, which means they take people out of it, they make decisions in a very different way. That's one thing. I think the other one, and this is one Janice will speak in a lot more detail on, would be just the fact that we are going to get to the place where natural resources as we see them right now on the extractive side of the business is going to become a much smaller percentage of where resources are coming from. I mean, I speak with lots of other industries in this space as well, and things like microbes that actually change waste into energy. Like that stuff exists today, and that's going to become more and more prevalent in our industry. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'd certainly agree with that. I mean, but as we've already noted, we're slow to change. So that transformation towards no mining, that'll take some time. But we do need to wake up. We've heard that investments are down, they continue to be down. The millennial generation, the younger generation, they're not interested into the business of mining. They're interested in the gadgets that come out from the production of the minerals and metals, but they're not interested in mining. And so we need to look at that and transform the way that we do our business for sure. And whether that is continuing to do greenfield development, but in a way that's more sustainable and more, not sustainable, but environmental and ethically done, or it's looking at the more reuse, recycling, a circular transformation towards a circular economy. Here in North America, we barely talk about circular economy. Go to Europe, that's all they talk about. Here, we are, lots of land, lots of resources, circular economy, what's that? We're on a linear path here. So yeah, we start thinking differently. We're gonna still need minerals and metals, but do we need to get them the same way we're doing it now? So yeah.
I think that the industry needs to start marketing to the end consumer a bit as well. And this is something I've been talking about quite a bit recently. I mean, use the example of Intel Inside. Everybody opens their laptop. They have no idea how it works, but they see that sticker. The millennial generation wants to buy a car made from sustainable materials. Market to the end consumer. Put your mining company inside every car. It's just a different way. There's a different way of kind of educating the end consumer about where their stuff comes from.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's the thing about the commodity business is that the mining industry produces commodities. They don't produce consumer goods. But the consumer drives where the products are going to go. So yes, can you have your green gold stamp because you use some non-cyanide lixiviant or leachant? Or can you use, say it's a green gold because it came from a waste, it's been taken from tailings, leached without cyanide, it's green gold, this is the This is the McEwen green gold. So, is that something for the next way of looking at the commodities? Absolutely. I think that's, marketing to the end user, for sure. And I think, too, with blockchain and with traceability, we'll be able to get there. Yes, it's challenging to be able to have that traceability with a concentrate, but it's starting to happen. So yes, we're going to be able to say, like was done in the past with blood diamonds, now we'll be able to say with commodities, yes, this was done ethically and it was done environmentally. And that'll be very appealing. And consumers will pay more for that. Yes.
I'll ask the next question. Just before I ask, I think an important point I'd like to make is that I'm only 24 years old. So normally I don't like to say that at mining events because of the stigma of people saying, oh, you don't have 20 years of experience, you don't know anything. So usually I don't tell people, but I think it's important for this question. So 24, I graduated from UBC mining engineer 2 years ago. And because I'm pretty well part of that generation, I can tell you that what kids are interested in today, what they want to do, people my age or younger, are the things that we're talking about today. So the automation, the robotics. I mean, the next panel is about space mining. That was my dream when I was in university. And so my question is kind of, why aren't there more people my age in this room? I work for Revos down in San Francisco. So it's a smaller company. And a big part of why I came to work at Revos in San Francisco was because I knew I'd have these opportunities. I worked for Tech, I worked for Goldcorp and Hewitt, and I loved all of them, but I knew that the first 5-10 years of my career, I would be on site. I'd be working on site, I would not be in this room. And so it's kind of a question for the panel as well as people in the audience, people working for the miners is, what do we have to do to get more people my age and younger in this room and a part of these conversations?
As just a quick response to that, I think one of the beauty of not having experience is that you look through a completely different lens. And so the ability of all us old farts to actually stop thinking that you need a huge amount of experience to get a job done and instead say, wow, okay, this guy may actually have some different views that could be game changers and industry, changes to a business that's been stuck in the old ways for a very long time. So I think all of us have an obligation to stop thinking that experience, and I get the whole safety side in mining, that experience is kind of in there linked with safety, but it's also a wonderful thing to have in your business, just a bucket load of no experience looking through that lens and saying, why are you doing it that way?
The question was also to the rest of the room. Does anyone else want to answer that question before we ask others?
I'll just piggyback on that one. When I first started in the industry, it was very common for the most junior person to go to a conference, be encouraged to give a paper or a poster, and now you rarely see that. You'll see people Pamela's age or just joking. So you're right. It used to be very common, but now there's very few. The curve of people your age has really dropped off. It used to be 12%, now it's 4% of the industry, and these people aren't asked to go to the conferences.
I think we're being wrapped up. Could we just thank our panelists very much for some fantastic insight into risk. Thank you very much.